Well, the last day of minicamp for the Seahawks, and the big story was the guy who wasn't here.
Right.
Although he is coming here, certainly if you judge by Pete Carroll's comments afterwards. That's Tarvaris Jackson we're talking about, to compete for the backup quarterbacking spot. Pete Carroll felt it necessary to make that clear as well. But
I'm glad he cleared that up.
all kidding aside, though, we had Doug Baldwin on too, and you can hear him on our podcast. And one of the things that you and I have both, I'm going to say maybe even marveled at a little bit, is the impression that Tarvaris Jackson has made with the Seahawks, to the point where I think to a man you're talking about a locker room that is truly excited that he is coming back, even though I don't think anyone to a man would think that he's coming back to be anything but the backup quarterback.
No, and as you said, Pete made that very clear, to compete for that backup spot. But those guys in that locker room, you talk to them on the record, off the record, they loved Tarvaris Jackson. And the second we brought that up in the interview with Doug Baldwin, and again, you can check it out on the podcast page, he got the biggest smile, and Doug doesn't smile a lot, to be honest, but he got a huge smile on his face, and he, before I even finished the sentence, he said, "My man T-Jack," and he, it's about who he was out there on the field, about what he sort of overcame, and how he played with that torn pec, and they talk about it being an injury that others would have, cashed the season in, but T-Jack, powered through it, and I think there's always been a perception by a lot of the guys here that he didn't get a fair shot in Minnesota. I tend to disagree with that, but that seemed to be the belief. He comes here, and I think there's some people that believe he kind of was dealt a shorthand here as well. Coming in, they came in off the lockout, so it was a condensed off season. He gets named the starter, then he gets hurt. He decides to play through the pec injury, so I think they look at it as, circumstances working against him, and didn't really complain, which really, really earned the respect and admiration of that locker room.
Well, another thing to think about, too, is he couldn't have been here for more than a couple of weeks that first time around, and he was named a captain. So even before he had the torn pec and played through that pain, which I don't think there's anything that endears you more, especially if you're a quarterback to a team, than making that additional sacrifice. But even before that happened, he had earned the respect of guys around here. And I mean, it's nothing against him, but it's unique to this team. I mean, it is unique to this organization. And Doug Ball, one of the points he made was just, he got a lot out of Jackson's experience. He got a lot out of the fact that he has started a bunch of games in Minnesota. So it's going to be done, and you got one happy locker room that it's going to happen.
And listen, think back to when we talked about him before. It was always about him as a starter. I never loved him as a starter. I still wouldn't love him as a starter for an extended period of time. But we always talked about, if he were your backup, that's completely different. And I love the idea of him as a backup. I have more faith in Tarvaris Jackson in his track record versus Brady Quinn in his.
Well, that's the battle, because, Pete Carroll's not going to give anyone a gig. They will be competing. But welcome back, T-Jack.